Presidential Strategies: The Response to Vietnam for Liberty University by Amber Keener for HIWD 375, The Korean War and the Vietnam War. The war in Vietnam was a long and difficult conflict. Because of its duration and the internal struggles faced by America, both politically and culturally during the war, several different presidents held office while the war raged on. The circumstances surrounding the president's individual movements into power and their own falls from grace were each unique. It is not surprising, then, that the approach to the war and to the country of Vietnam itself changed over time. Each president was concerned with different aspects and held various goals which perhaps were not the same as his predecessors. This shift in leadership reflected clearly in the way the war was fought and the attitude with which the United States approached issues faced during the conflict, both at home and abroad. The first president to deal with the struggles facing Southeast Asia was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Although many place the majority of the blame for the United States' involvement in Vietnam upon Lyndon B. Johnson, the greater portion of fault can be placed with President Eisenhower. He is famous for coining the term domino effect, which insinuates that China was the first domino to fall to communist thinking, with Korea and then Vietnam following along in its path. It was Eisenhower who set America on its way to a full-blown war with the Vietnamese. According to David Watry, virtually all the crises in foreign affairs that Kennedy and Johnson confronted have their origins in the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower felt the need to take a strong stand against communism and ran on a Republic platform in 1952 of containment, specifically of the Soviet Union. This extended beyond the realm of war and into even scientific endeavors when he established NASA to compete with the USSR. In dealings with South Vietnam, the Eisenhower administration clearly had its own goals. A blatant disregard of the Geneva Accords was followed by financial and military aid to the Diem regime. Elections which were clearly rigged when unquestioned by the United States. The government set up by Diem was full of murder and brutality, but they did not fall under the label of communism, and so the U.S. looked the other way. The transition from the oldest man to the youngest man to ever hold the office of president brought with it a plethora of issues and concerns which faced the United States, both domestically and internationally. John F. Kennedy felt the need to prove that a Democrat could draw a hard line against communists. Kennedy therefore had little choice but to continue the policies put into place by the previous administration. The line against the tide of communism must be held. Kennedy, however, did see that there was a cost involved with the idea of nuclear warfare, and he took a stance against the New Look. Kennedy worked hard for the expansion of the Army Special Forces, which would be a vital component to the Vietnam conflict. There are also some historians who feel Kennedy's support of Diem was caused more by an alignment of their common Catholicism rather than similarities of governing policy. Diem ruled with violence and brutality against those in opposition to him, yet this regime was supported as democratic by the United States in order to hold back communism in the North. Kennedy's approach to the Vietnam conflict cannot be understood in full due to his assassination in November 1963. Many who worked in the administration believe Kennedy would have worked to de-escalate the situation in Southeast Asia with the intention of removing Americans from the conflict. Lyndon B. Johnson is remembered as the president who led America into the Vietnam War. This is perhaps an incomplete assessment, considering the conditions under which he took office. However, it cannot be ignored that the Johnson administration knowingly moved forward with military aggression against North Vietnam based on incorrect data and reports. The deception which surrounded the Gulf of Tonkin incidents brought Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, allowing Johnson freedom to engage in military action against imagined aggression. This resolution was viable till peace was deemed to be established, and Johnson took full advantage of such open-ended policies. The information regarding the false foundations on which the Tonkin Resolution was based would remain hidden from the American public for years. The Tonkin Resolution itself would be pushed to and even beyond its legal limit to move forward with a foreign policy which brought disunity to the United States unlike anything seen since the Civil War. The divisions which plagued the years Johnson was in office had one foot in the domestic issues and the other foot in the international issues facing the United States. Johnson's sudden thrust to power following the shocking assassination of John F. Kennedy did not help his management of the conflict he inherited. Johnson held strong opinions about his great society, and he did much to further the progressive agenda to create medical and financial aid for the poverty-stricken people of America. This great society, envisioned by Johnson, was threatened, however, by the extended conflict halfway around the world in Vietnam. Johnson popularized the economic concept of guns versus butter, which explores the balance between domestic spending and military spending. In the end, it is Johnson who is held most responsible for the actions taken in Vietnam, including the ground war, which was particularly costly in both American lives and money. Richard Nixon won election for president following Johnson's single term in office. Johnson had not been forced out of office, but news of his decision to not run again was met with jubilation. America was incredibly divided over the war. Nixon came into office with a plan to bring about an end to the presence of American soldiers in Vietnam. This was not, however, to be done simply through withdrawing troops. The most vital part of his strategy was the Vietnamization, which it was hoped would allow America to withdraw, but without the problem of leaving behind a power vacuum. His first step of extended violence and quick aggression, which also included an incursion into Cambodia, brought about a severe wave of American protests, the worst of which ended with 4 college students dead on the campus of Kent State in Ohio. After such a violent response by the general population, Congress finally began to create legislation which would limit the ability to mobilize military actions in Southeast Asia. Nixon is now, however, best known because of the Watergate scandal, which at the time was the height of internal deception and illegal activities. President Nixon did, however, begin to restore relations with China, which was a historic endeavor. Following the Paris Peace Accords, Congress passed the War Powers Act, which has been the longest lasting of the policies put into place during the war. This law put a leash onto the presidency as far as war powers were concerned. Another lasting reform by the Nixon administration has been the changes to the draft process. No longer are those seeking higher education exempt, which had led to class profiling for war duty. Rather, it now relies on a lottery system.